The basic rules of chess. My name is Claude Zimbelmann. This is a 3D animation I created using Cinema 4D and Adobe Premiere. I have been playing chess off and on since 1967, including playing chess tournaments. I believe that there is no better game. I hope this video will help those needing to refresh the rules and teach those who never played before. I tried to make this video very simple and easy to use. It's repetitive, but trying to make it easier for people new to the game. I'd watch it the first time in full. After that, scroll through to watch the areas that are still confusing to you. Thanks for watching. I hope it helps you. Setting up the chessboard. Make sure the white corner square is always on the right. Learning to identify the chess pieces. The king, the queen, the bishop, the knight, the rook, the pawn. How to set up the chess pieces. Here's what the final setup should look like. Starting with the kings, notice the white king is on the dark square and the black king is on the white square. Next, setting up the queens. Notice the white queen is on the white square and the black queen is on the dark square. Now the bishops. Then the knights. Next the rooks. Finally setting up the pawns. Moving the rook. Starting with the rook can be moved either vertically or horizontally. The rook can move to any one of the yellow highlighted squares. The rook can move in one move to either one square to as many squares available in a path you choose. In this simple setup, the white rook can move one space towards the black pawn or can capture the black pawn. Or the white rook can move one or two spaces towards the white knight. Or the white rook can move one or two spaces towards the black rook or can capture the black rook. Moving the knight. Now the knight has unique movements. The knight can move to any one of the highlighted yellow squares. Notice the L-shaped movements. In this scenario, the knight can move to the empty square. The knight could also capture the rook. Also, the knight can capture the bishop. The knight is the only piece that can jump over pieces when moving. Moving the bishop. The bishop moves diagonally to any one of the highlighted squares. The bishop can move in one move, either one square or as many squares available in the path you choose. In this scenario, the bishop can move to one of the empty squares moving away from the rook. The bishop can move to the empty square next to the rook. The bishop can move to the empty square next to the queen, or the bishop can capture the queen. Moving the queen. The queen moves horizontally, vertically, and diagonally. Notice all the highlighted squares the queen can move to. The queen in one move can either move one square to as many squares available in a path you choose. In this setup, the queen can move one square towards the white knight. The queen can move one square towards the black pawn, or it can capture the black pawn. The queen can move one or two squares towards the black knight, or it can capture the black knight. Or the queen can move to one of the empty squares in any of the other paths. The queen can move one or two squares towards the white rook. Moving the pawn only moves in one direction. The pawn can move either one or two squares forward vertically on its initial move. The pawn can only move two moves if it has never moved before. Normally, the pawn only moves one square. The pawn captures an opponent's piece by moving forward one space diagonally. En passant takes place when your pawn is on the fifth row and the opponent's pawn on the adjacent columns only moves past your pawn with its initial move of two squares. Then your pawn can now take the pawn as if it only moved one square. If the opponent's pawn has moved before, you cannot take it using en passant when it passes your pawn. If your opponent's pawn moves two squares but is not adjacent to your pawn cannot capture it. When the pawn reaches the last row, it will be exchanged for either a queen, rook, bishop, or knight. It's the choice of the person that moved the pawn. Moving the king. Now the king moves horizontally, vertically, and diagonally. However, the king can only move one square at a time. In this setup, the king cannot move to the red squares. The king cannot move to the square that is being attacked by another piece. The rook is attacking these squares that are potential moves of the king. The queen is attacking these three squares that are potential moves of the king. The king can move to the empty square available. Also, the king can capture the knight. The pieces have a power value. You shouldn't give up a piece that has higher value to capture a piece of lower value if your piece will be lost in the trade. In other words, don't give up a queen to capture a knight. The queen has a value of 9 and the knight has a value of 3. However, it is okay to give up a queen if you capture 2 rooks during the trade of the pieces. Important rules. Attacking the king is called checking the king. You have to tell your opponent when checking his king. The rook moves to check the king. King has to move out of check. The king always has to get out of check by moving, blocking, or taking the piece that is attacking him. Kings next to each other can't move to the red squares due to moving into check. Moving into a check, not allowed. Castling on the king's side is accomplished by the king moving 2 squares toward the rook, then the rook moves to the square on the other side of the king. The king can also castle on the queen's side by the king moving 2 squares towards the rook, then the rook moves to the square on the other side of the king. Castling is only possible if the king and the rook involved have never moved before, and there are no other pieces in the way. Also during castling, the king cannot cross a square being attacked by the opponent. The king cannot castle if he is now being checked. This is a simple opening to show you each one moves 1 move, then the other side makes 1 move, alternating back and forth 1 move at a time. Also notice the movements of the pieces. White always plays the first move in the game. The game is a draw. A draw. Neither side can win when only 1 knight or 1 bishop is all that is left. White to move. This is a draw called stalemate. The king is not under attack and cannot move without moving into check, which is not allowed. This is another draw if the exact same position occurs 3 times. The scenario is potentially a draw unless white makes a mistake. Then it's winnable. However, it's automatically a draw if black fails to checkmate the king in 50 moves or less. Anytime one side gets down to the king only, the other side has to checkmate them in 50 moves or less, or else it's considered a draw. Winning the game, checkmate. Checkmate is when a king is under attack and can't get out of it. Besides being attacked, every potential square to escape is being attacked. This is one example of how a king can be checkmated. White moves the rook to prevent black king from moving to the squares in red. Black king moves to attack the rook. The rook moves to the other side of the board to prevent the king from taking the rook, but also still blocking the king from moving to the red squares, keeping him on that side of the chessboard. Now the black king makes his move. The rook moves to attack the king and block additional squares. Notice the red squares. Black king moves to get out of check. Again, the rook moves to attack the king and block the squares. Notice the red squares. Also notice white is cutting down on the squares the black king can move to. Black king moves again to get out of check. Then the white rook again attacks the king, cutting off more squares. Black king moves again to get out of check, attacking the rook. Now the rook moves to the other side of the board to stay out of reach of the king, but still maintaining cutting off the black king's potential move squares. The black king moves again, attacking the square the white rook may move to. Now the other rook moves to the other side of the board to stay out of reach of the black king. The black king moves again. Now the rook moves, checking the black king and blocking the black king's escape path. Notice the king is being forced to the last row of the chessboard. Now the rook moves in for the kill. The black king is under attack and cannot move to any square that isn't under attack. Checkmate. Hopefully this video has helped you It's a great game, and I encourage people to learn it. Your comments and questions are always welcome. Thank you for watching.